which of your favorite fitness influencers are completely full of it and which ones actually give solid advice. Today, I'm going to be reviewing literally everyone's training programs because at this point, I've tried out virtually all of them. I do apologize in advance about my hair and my clothes. I've literally just finished training legs and getting one of the worst haircuts of my life. We move. But it goes to show that if you are jacked and you have a good jawline and you're lean, then you don't need to worry too much about your haircut. You're going to look good regardless. So if you want to save literally years off of your progress, because I've tried everything so you don't have to, make sure you watch until the end of the video. Let's start off with how I got into the gym, and that was because I wanted to look like Jeff Seid. Back in 2016, the golden era of Gymshark, that is the kind of physique that you wanted to have. It was lean, but it was muscular. It wasn't like too meatball-y. So I didn't get into the bodybuilding side of things until much later down the line. So I thought that if I trained like someone, then I would look like them, and it couldn't be further from the truth. And Jeff's training was pretty meh. What it did do is give me a very solid start to the gym, some foundations, because otherwise I probably would have gone in like many people do without any sort of plan or idea of what they actually want to do when they get in the gym. So even though the training wasn't spectacularly programmed, it was a decent little foundation. So even though I was hitting chest 3 times a week and it was basically a modified bro split with loads of volume, a bunch of supersets, it got the job done to get me started. Obviously, when you're new to the gym, everything will work. You'll make some gains. I did get a bit stronger, gained a little bit of muscle, but I did quickly plateau on it because I think the volume was way too high. I think even for something that was clearly meant to be a bit more chest specific, Jeff back in the day was notorious for saying his chest was a weak point that he really wanted to bring up. I think it was just really excessive workload. There wasn't much thought put into the sequencing of the exercises, the split throughout the week. I was training 5 to 6 times a week, which I think from a neural standpoint is probably a little bit too much for most people. There wasn't anything really in depth there. It was mainly just exercises that everyone was kind of doing at the time. Bench press, deadlifts, nothing really kind of impressive. But it did give me a little start. I think it would be safe to give this maybe like a 5.5 to, we'll be nice and give it, say, a 6. This pen isn't working very well. A 6 out of 10. That's not great. 6 out of 10. Next up, the next kind of person that I got a little bit further into was Kinobody. I loved the lifestyle. I loved just kind of how obnoxious he was, to be honest. And his training actually wasn't bad. It's something that in some aspects I still kind of come back to today. Even though his marketing is very sort of cliche, the dude is actually smart. If you listen to some of his longer form content, he is actually kind of clued up when it comes to the literature and the training. What I really love about it is that it was really applicable. The reason that I've come back to it so much over the years is because it is very minimalist and it does integrate some of those real foundational principles of progressive overload, focusing on those basic lifts, getting really, really strong at them and using what's at your disposal to really max out that progression in your performance was a really, really good way to get me kind of fast tracking my progress at the time, because I think I just kind of went into the gym. The only reason I kind of wanted to get stronger was to bench press more than other people in my school year, but Jeff Seid's program had no kind of real concept of progression to it as well. Kinobody was a complete game changer for that. And I think the minimalist approach, how applicable it is, I think maybe give it some minus points for the lack of leg training. I would actually probably give this as a whole maybe an 8 out of 10. It was pretty damn good. I think anyone could benefit from running a program similar to some of Kinobody's training styles. I think he got me really into the calories in, calories out side of things and dictating that energy balance was also the most important when it came to a diet. I think that when I first started off, I really thought that I had to eat a lot of bro foods, a lot of chicken and broccoli, like some of those other fitness models are doing. And I think as a lifestyle, Kinobody's program really, really shone out. Now, as I got further into things, I started to get more into the aesthetics realm. And once again, this was like peak Gymshark era, which meant that it didn't take too long for me to come across Ziz. And even though there isn't loads of documentation about how he used to train back in the day, I did come across some articles, some videos of people pointing out how he used to train. And one thing that I remember quite vividly was that it was almost a bit of a bro split and then a bit of a full body session tagged on at the end of the week to create that little bit of extra frequency. Now, the reason that that was terrible is because if you do a full arm day on Friday and then go to train full body on Saturday just to tick off training things twice a week, something that you trained earlier in the week is of course going to have way more time to recover. So I do like splits that are a little bit more even with their session structure. If you're doing some very high volume sessions and then a bit of a touch up, there's going to be a lot of bleed over in terms of fatigue from other muscle groups. And once again, there just wasn't really much of an emphasis on progression. All in all, I think that would probably be a 5 out of 10. If you wanted to exercise in the gym, then it's going to give you a bit of structure. Having a back day, having a chest day is sound, but there just wasn't really too much method to the madness. It was literally just a case of someone who was, taking some gear, looked amazing, had the basics of diet and training down, and looked pretty solid. Going further into the aesthetics side of things, Christian Guzman was one of my biggest inspirations back in the day. I loved how driven he was, how methodical he was, and that kind of continued through his training, not only his business and kind of seeing him excel and rise to the top with Alphalete and stuff like that, but I used to try out a lot of his workouts. He used to document a lot of the different workouts that he was doing, and I think that there was some really, really good structure in there. I think, again, because it was kind of peak sort of a Gymshark era back in the day, there was a lot of basic movements in there, bench press, etc. There wasn't really too much thought put into things, but he already did start to have a bit of a better concept of programming, allocating more volume to certain body parts, exercise selection more according to his weak points. There was a little bit more method to the madness, and I think the only thing that really holds it back is really not taking things to an even more advanced level when it comes to exercise selection and machine choice, something that I think he did start to kind of delve into a little bit more as he started to set up his gyms. But from what I tried out back in the day, I think I can only really give this, especially from kind of the higher volume perspective, as I was starting to plateau a little bit at this point, I was just training like a massive gym bro. I think I'm gonna have to cap this at a 7 out of 10. At this point, I was starting to plateau. I'd been in the gym for a few years and I wasn't really kind of getting much stronger, wasn't getting much bigger. I was just kind of, maintaining that kind of progress that I'd been making. So I started to now really want more. My friends were all progressing more than me and I just wanted to be bigger, stronger, leaner. So I started to dig into kind of all the other influencers. So this could have been David Lade, anyone else that was kind of peak Gymshark, Matt Ogus, Hodge Twins, literally anyone that was kind of pretty popular at the time. What's that other dude? Physiques of Greatness, Jones, can't even remember the names. But I tried out literally everything. And I think just the sheer amount of volume was something that was a massive sticking point because I could train hard. That volume was just way too much to recover from in hindsight. And that was something that at the time, just very bro training was sort of the in thing. So that's probably going to be similarly like 5, 6 out of 10, all sort of the Gymshark era stuff, similar to kind of Jeff's side. It was good for a little bit of structure, but there wasn't really anything much beyond that. Where things did start to change a little bit was then when I started to observe the science a little bit more, started to realize that the industry does get carried by genetics and drugs a lot. So just because someone looks a certain way doesn't mean that if you train that way, you will also look like them. So I started to now move in the opposite direction. I started to dig a little bit more into the science and what's now become known as optimal training. And phase one of that was the very nerdy guys. Mike Israetel, Jeff Nippard, those kind of guys. I remember I used to watch Omar Isuf's channel quite a lot, and he used to have these guys on as guests all the time, which led me further into their content. This was back when I was in college and I actually did my EPQ, Extended Project Qualification, on some like optimal training studies I looked into, and I based that on a lot of Jeff's and Mike's work, a lot of their content, Brad Schoenfeld studies as a result of that, all of that good stuff. And this is where I encountered even more of a plateau in my training. So this was just a time where I wasn't really making much progress, even though I was in the gym 6 days a week, training my ass off. What they started to point out to me was the whole kind of concept of frequency, volume, intensity, how these kind of intertwined a little bit with each other, how natural lifters maybe don't want to be training super hard. It started to ingrain the idea of recovery a little bit more in me, playing around with higher volumes, but some reps in reserve, things like that. A little bit when it came to exercise selection. But as I move forward, I realized that there are two massive pitfalls to this optimized way of training and paying attention to all these studies. And that's that, number one, studies don't often apply very nicely to the real world. There are studies now that show that people make better gains doing like 50 working sets of a muscle a week. And that's all good and well if that theoretically did work better. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. But what would that matter if you've got a busy career? You wouldn't be able to do a leg day with 50 sets. You'd be in the gym for hours and hours every single day. And that's where the real bottleneck started to come into my progress as I started to work at a very well-known corporate finance firm. And this is where I just couldn't keep up with things. I couldn't execute consistently. I really had to dial my training back. And that is why now I've really gone back to my roots with my coaching, and I'm helping career-driven men and women really maximize their progress with the Pinnacle program, which is something I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. So if you're like me, if you're enjoying me kind of reviewing all this, I've done all the work for you. I've tried every training plan out there, and I've used it to build the pinnacle of training. If you want to know a little bit more about it, just drop me a DM on Instagram saying lean, and I will share the entire strategy with you. I'll even send you a little sample workout plan completely free. So Jeff Nippard, Dr. Mike, I think I'm gonna have to cap them probably around a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10. Reason number two being, aside from the application, you realize that not all research is good research. Not all evidence is good evidence. You need to think critically about your source. Sure, these studies might say this very robust conclusion, but if that study was conducted on 50-year-olds that have never trained, then that's not going to be very applicable to someone who's now trying to eke out that next level of progress. It needs to be contextual, so you know that it will be guaranteed to work for you. And that's why the principles in my Pinnacle program have been getting the guys and girls on my team results like never before. This is where something really changed for me when it came to my results, because I was training at a gym called Area 51 at the time, and once upon a time I saw this absolute monster in that gym. That was a man by the name of Jordan Peters. He was, I thought this guy must have been an Olympian. I'd never seen anything that big before. I was into all the aesthetics guys, but this was my first dip into bodybuilding, because this guy was enormous. And as I started to find out who he was, I saw his content, and a lot of it just made really good sense. I did really like Jeff Nippard's videos because I thought, well, this guy's natural, so if I'm natural, then that means I can take on board what he's saying, and I know that it'll apply to me, bit of critical thinking. But Jordan Peters showed me that even if someone is taking silly amounts of gear, there are some people out there who really do know what they're on about. And even though there were a couple of shortcomings, I think especially as time's gone on, Jordan, I think, has started to not know where kind of the line is in terms of evidence, but I won't go into that in this video. At the time, it was exactly what I needed, and that was a really good introduction to higher intensity, lower volume training. It taught me a lot of the foundations about the details of programming, resistance profiles, exercise selection, really kind of optimizing things for progressive overload. And this ties back nicely to Kinobody's plans. And although I'd say the session structures of Jordan's ended up getting to a point where they were very strange in terms of just lots and lots of exercises, even though they were very low volume per exercise, I'd say all in all, I'd probably give what I learned from Jordan probably a solid 8.5 to be safe, maybe even a 9 because of how much it did for my progress. It put a lot of muscle onto me. And these two guys, Kinobody and Jordan Peters, did do bits for my progress over the years. They're definitely the highest rated on this list at the moment. So I really went all in with that low volume, aggressive approach. And I think one of the other shortcomings is because of how focused around progression it was, and there was this like dark energy that surrounded this style of training, very Dorian Yates-esque, very hardcore. I think it just burns you out mentally if you get too kind of far gone into that. And that's where I really did enjoy meeting and becoming good friends with Kelvin Hind. He's an IFBB Classic Physique Pro. He took second at the Masters Olympia. Was it last year? Yeah, last year. It's still only 2024, which is nice. Very, very well accomplished bodybuilder, really knows his stuff when it comes to a lot of training principles. And I started training at his gym. We quickly became good friends just because of how much we love bodybuilding, training, physique development. And he really put the fun back into training for me. He showed me that you can train really hard, you can train progressively, but there's a little bit more nuance to it, that it's not just about shifting the weight for the sake of progressive overload. He really helped me refine my technique with a lot of exercises. He showed me how to use a few more intensifiers, which I then took into my Pinnacle training system. The second set that we would often do of an exercise, we would mix things up a little bit, throw in a rest pause, throw in a drop set. And even though there's a little bit of evidence out there to suggest that straight sets might be superior, when it comes to being efficient in the gym and managing your time, the correct application of some of these techniques can be really, really useful. So Kelvin really helped me spice things up as I was really starting to get my foundations down. And Kelvin, there are a lot of things that Kelvin and I agree and disagree on when it comes to training. Kelvin, it is worth noting that evidence, or should I say, what's the word? Anecdote is still a form of evidence. Kelvin's got an incredible physique. He's built people some incredible physiques. And although there are some parts of his training that I find recovery capacity is definitely not built for, we do therefore have some things that we agree and disagree about when it comes to training. We can still talk everything through though. I think what's super important is that you don't overthink your training. Nothing should stop you actually taking action, getting in the gym, working towards your goals. And you shouldn't knock something down as good or bad. There's often a lot of things that are open to interpretation and some big gray areas. Obviously, as a master's, he's a little bit older. He's got more to worry about when it comes to joints and managing injuries. So some of his training, he does a lot with much higher volume stuff. We're talking like almost German volume training, which in some of the literature has been shown to be less effective in trained athletes compared to something like 5x5 when it comes to strength progressions and hypertrophy. It works very well for him. It's worked plenty well for some of his clients. So even though we disagree on a lot of things, I can't give Kelvin like top marks. Sorry, Kelv. There's no denying that it really does work. But for me, if I'm rating it, there was still a lot that I was able to take on board from Kelvin, even just when it came to refining my technique and stuff. So I'm going to give it a solid 8 or 7.5 out of 10 as well. Definitely some really good lessons I learned from the many training sessions that I've had with Kelv. Always a fun time. And that brings us to now kind of my more moderate and balanced approach. And this is where I started to come across some more of Paul Carter's content. Obviously someone who is also renowned as being very optimal and evidence-based, but I think Paul actually does do a really good job of understanding the mechanisms and underpinning theory rather than just, here's a study that says this, therefore this works. It's about understanding what really underpins that. If you're going to dive deep into the literature, at this point I've done a bachelor's degree in sport, exercise, and nutrition. So really learning the mechanisms underpinning these things, the physiology, the mechanics, not just what does the conclusion of a potentially poorly executed study say, is where you can start to think critically and think about what is actually going to be applicable to you. So Paul was really useful in that regard. He did come up with many cool concepts when it came to exercise selection based on some mechanics, neuromechanical matching, some ideas like that. So Paul's advice as a review and everything, I think when it comes to workload, recovery, progression, I'd say Paul's stuff is like a pretty solid 9 or 9.5. I'd say Paul is kind of leading the way at the moment. I love Paul's content. And what I've done over these years is really just take all the bits that I love from each of these people that I've listened to. So I wanted to give you an idea today of how many things I've been through, how I can actually really shortcut my clients' progress because I've made the mistakes. I've been there. I've been in this game for years now. I've competed. I've taken my physique to serious levels. And all the mistakes I've made along the way by learning, because the one thing that I've always loved more than my own physique progression, if you look at my older pictures, you can tell that I'm no genetic freak. And that's why a lot of my clients actually get better results than me. I've coached people further along than myself. It's simply because I've always just had a passion for learning. I wanted to learn what the most efficient way to build the body of your dreams is. So I've tried literally everything out there at this point, and that's why I brought it all together into my Pinnacle training system. The importance of exercise selection, the importance of the physiology to drive the amount of workload that you do. Everything pieced together in a certain way to deliver a specific outcome. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the videos to come and what exactly my Pinnacle training system is all about. Might even touch on the hybrid nutrition strategies that help my clients drop 20 to 40 pounds in just 16 weeks. If you want to know more, as I said, DM me the word lean on Instagram and I'll happily share with you exactly what is included in that. But I'll save the mystery for another day. For now, I wanted to give you guys an idea of who you might want to listen to, who you might not want to listen to, being a little bit critical with your thinking, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed. If you did, make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Thank you for